united in diversity. We are very heterogeneous in our opinion.
If we do not renew our partnerships with the rest of the world, Europe will not be relevant.
We can make it if we are together as Europeans.
Do you genuinely believe that countries will manage to reach these very ambitious targets?
Good morning and welcome to day 2 of Politico's Competitive Europe Week. I'm Douglas Busvine, I'm Politico's trade editor. I'm delighted to see you out in such force on day 2. Always a risky moment in a conference like this. Well, we're feeling a sense of mission creep over at Politico Towers. Although our newsletter is titled Morning Trade, we're starting to think that we might want to rebrand it as Morning Economic Security. Certainly, Ursula von der Leyen's second-term agenda with her call for a new foreign economic policy and a greater focus on competitiveness has changed the terms of the discussion, as have her calls for the greater focus on trade defence. So for today at least, we're leaning strongly into the theme of security with our first 2 sessions this morning, chaired by Camille Guis of our trade team. We'll also hear more later from Philippe Ducombe, the president of ExxonMobil in Europe, and from former Italian Prime Minister Enrico Letta, the author of an important report on the future of the single market. We'll also look at how the EU wants to keep its critical technology and research out of the hands of unfriendly rivals, and at how the EU can lay its hands on those scarce raw materials it needs to complete its green technology revolution. Well, I had a couple of questions there. Since already Europe appears to have fallen away behind in fields like artificial intelligence, are there any crown jewels left to protect? And hasn't China already cornered the market in all those critical raw materials? Well, answers coming soon. After lunch, we'll pivot to financial services. Then we will compare notes on the policy agenda for the next 5 years and whether the idea of a capital markets union can ever become a reality. Maybe UniCredit CEO Andrea Orcel will make it happen a bit faster than we all expect by pulling off an improbable takeover of Germany's Commerzbank. But there are a few politicians in Berlin who have other ideas. So, welcome once again. I hope you enjoy day 2 of Competitive Europe Week. So before we kick off, I'd like to thank our partners for making the summit possible. Our leading partners are ACEA, Booking.com, FPA, and Google. Our presenting partners are ExxonMobil, Microsoft, Santander, and Vodafone. Our knowledge partner is McKinsey Global Institute, and our visibility partners are the German Council on Foreign Relations and the German Marshall Fund. And, of course, housekeeping to get through before we kick off properly. We love a good debate, so let's keep the conversation going. Share your thoughts with us on X or any other social media you prefer using our hashtag Politico Competitive Week. We can't wait to hear what you have to say. And during our networking breaks, come and meet our pro teams and enjoy some delicious macarons, I hope I pronounced that better than I did yesterday, together in the networking space. While you're there, explore the rest of our exciting partners' installations and connect with fellow attendees. And now we will begin with our opening fireside chat that will set the scene on the topic of economic security, moderated by our Politico trade reporter, Camille Guis. Thank you very much.
Hi, good morning, everyone, and welcome if you are tuning in and joining us in the room here at the Politico Competitive Europe Summit. So my name is Camille Guis, and I'm a trade reporter here at Politico. So today, fireside chat, will touch upon the economic security package, which is one of the flagship policies of the next European Commission. So it essentially seeks to make sure the EU doesn't rely too much on its rival regarding critical technologies. So Ursula von der Leyen actually unveiled and created the newly created role of Trade and Economic Security Commissioner and assigned it to Maroš Šefčovič. So the strategy is said to be one of the main challenges for the European Commission in the next 5 years, and so we'll dig into what it means. So perhaps a brief reminder to talk about us on X, just as Doug was saying, or on any social media of your choice with the hashtag Politico Competitive Europe Week. So without further ado, I'm delighted to introduce our distinguished panelist, Pascal Lamy, on stage with me. So he's the Vice President of the Paris Peace Forum, coordinator of the Jacques Delors Institute. He's a former Trade Commissioner and a former Director General of the World Trade Organization. We were supposed to have with us today Håkan Jevrell, the Swedish Secretary of State to the Minister for International Trade, who's unfortunately unwell and couldn't join us. So Mr. Lamy, it's only going to be you and me for the next 20 minutes. So perhaps my most immediate question for you is going to be, the EU is slated to hold a vote on Friday on whether to impose duties on Chinese electric vehicles, right? So even the German ambassador yesterday hinted that it's likely that we are going to see the duties imposed at the vote. So do you think this probe, which at the end of the day seeks to make sure that European producers are competitive against Chinese ones, is a good thing to advance the EU's economic security strategy ambitions?
Well, I'll give an answer with a bit of context. Early this morning, I reread the opening statement I made roughly 25 years ago when I was grilled as a candidate trade commissioner by the European Parliament. And reading this, I was really shocked at how much this world has changed. The world I was living in at the time, we were living in at the time, and the sort of view I had whether trade opening was or not the right way to go and on which conditions was much simpler. Mm-hmm. So this world has totally changed. The EU has to change, and its trade policy is changing. And it started changing roughly 2 years after the first mandate, the mandate of Jean-Claude Juncker, with a creeping but pretty solid reinforcement of trade defense instruments. And then we know that this was developed with the first von der Leyen Commission. And I will give you my view and then answer your question. Trade opening has to remain the core of an EU trade policy. And the reasons for that are not ideological, they're not about feelings, they are about facts and numbers. We in the EU have a too low growth potential for the 10 years to come. This is our problem number one, and I think Heidi made it absolutely clear. Other economies on this planet are growing faster than we are. This is a problem. But it is also an opportunity to go and pump growth outside what we don't have inside. And this is why it is absolutely necessary for the EU to keep as many markets open for its own sake. So this is absolutely core, and the reality is that we are more trade dependent than other industrialized economies. We are not as trade dependent as China, but still, China and EU have in common the fact that they need exports for their economy. It's a different setup, of course. Right? So this is structural. We cannot decouple from the global economy. Now, this being said, and I'm going back to my comparison with 25 years ago, this trade opening core is now influenced, determined, impacted by other policy requirements. 3 of them. We've seen that in the first von der Leyen Commission environment. Most of the big changes in the EU trade policy are about greening trade, and I've been working a lot on that with the Institut Jacques Delors in Brussels, which, by the way, publishes today a big piece about stock-taking of what has been done in trying and more or less succeeding in greening trade. So that's one. Economic security, which is today's theme, is the second one. And the third one is competitiveness, not least because we've lost competitiveness for the last 10 or 15 years as compared to our global competitors. And there are many reasons for that, including a big problem on innovation. Now, back to your question on EVs. We all believe that the Commission will get the clearance to impose these duties. Whether this is the end of the story and whether the Chinese will react in a way that would allow some sort of understanding is unclear. Although, as a, let's say, if not a technician, at least expert, I can tell you that things like voluntary export restrictions or price undertaking are extremely difficult for cars. They're even very difficult for bicycles. And I know that from my time.
It's a different story than the solar panels.
Absolutely.
For sure.
So, but my answer to your question is, I believe that the trade policy is the tail of the dog. The dog is a proper industrial policy, industrial strategy, in a sector which, unlike solar panels, runs very deep in the EU economic and social fabric, not least because of the number of bits and pieces providers, but also in the whole job machinery, not just about producing cars, but about repairing cars and maintaining cars. So that's my point of view, and it probably will be one of the main outcomes, if not findings, of a big work which the Institut Jacques Delors in Paris and Sciences Po have started 8 months ago about the future of the auto sector, and notably of what does moving to electric mobility mean for the EU value chains and its relationships with, of course, China.
Yeah. And perhaps if we zoom out a little bit, and when you look at the rollout of the European economic security strategy in general, what do you see as the main challenges and as the main problems so far for the strategy? Do you think we've been spending too much time, on the protect pillar of the strategy? Was the EU too defensive in a way?
No, I think the EU trade stance is morphing as it reacts to changes in the rest of the world that risk damaging us if we don't. If you look at what's happened since, let's say, 2010, the EU has been struck by crises, a series of crises. All of them came from outside. None of them came from inside. I mean, we have our own problems, but we did not have to face a shock that was as big as what happened with the financial crisis or the Russian invasion of Ukraine or the wrong policy stance of the US in the Middle East. This is all coming from the outside. So inevitably, politically, strategically, we have to demonstrate that insofar as we exercise some sort of statecraft, and please note my extremely diplomatic words, and I'm very slowly becoming a diplomat. I still have a bit of time to get it right. I think this is the issue. And we have to react. The problem is that given that we are a 27-member union and not a state, we still have adjustments to make as we move to statecraft, which take a bit of time. And to answer precisely your question, the first problem we have about a proper inclusion of the notion of security in our trade policy is, what is security? If I asked Estonia or Portugal or Greece or Germany or Italy, what is security? I won't get the same answer. Mm-hmm. I always dreamed that the chair of the European Council would sort of do a written test with the members. You have 10 minutes to explain to me in one page what is security.
And what is security?
You look at the result and you start a discussion. Mm-hmm. That's what Borrell started, for instance, tried with his strategic compass. Mm-hmm. So, because we have different visions of where we are, where we should be vis-à-vis the rest of the world, what are interests, where are our comparative advantages. So, little by little, this is coming. But it can only come from a convergence at EU level.
On the definition.
On the definition, and why? Because the trade policy with competition policy is the only seriously federalized policy. And the reason why we need a federalized policy is because trade is very important for us. But if we did not have that, it would be a total mess. If think 1 minute that we would change our constitutional arrangements and give the trade policy back to our member states, it would be a big mess. And frankly speaking, the Chinese minister or the USTR, who take the EU commissioner seriously, and I can tell you they take the EU commissioner seriously, they would laugh. Mm-hmm. And that would not go in the direction of making the EU better at protecting its fundamental interests. Now, again, the issue is how do you put trade opening at the core of the policy while mitigating it and explaining it. Yeah. And I'm dreaming of a sort of EU equivalent to this very elegant formula, which, by the way, means nothing in practice, but it's very elegant and politically effective, that the US invented with this small yard high fence. If you can define your trade policy in 4 words, that's super. We need to do that.
Okay, and so you mentioned at the beginning of your intervention that you've been going through hearings yourself. So, and actually with the Jacques Delors Institute, you were among the first to call for an economic security commissioner. There you have it. So we have Maroš Šefčovič being nominated for the first time. So what do you make of him for the job, and how do you see perhaps the nexus of his job with the one of Stéphane Séjourné as EVP?
I don't think it's a secret. I met both of them yesterday.
Great.
Not to tell them what to do, but to listen to their views. And of course, both of them know that they will have to appear to the European Parliament, and that any difference or bit or sign of a possible difference between what they will say will be heavily scrutinized. So they are aware of this. They are working together. But I think we now have a commission set up, which 20 years after the stupid, in my view, decisions that were taken in Nice, with 27 commissioners, which doesn't make sense from a proper governance point of view. We now, little by little, and it took 20 years to get there, have moved to a commission with 2 levels. One which is about a portfolio plus coordination, another one with a portfolio. This is, of course, mixed with the fact that portfolios have a very different substance, depending if you are on transport, on health, on trade, on competition, or on monetary affairs. So this is, I think, the model for the future. It progressively emerged as both a political priority, a better way of looking at how the EU is working. I mean, if you take among the 6 or 7 portfolios that matter most, this time, 5 of them are in the hands of, let's say, larger than smaller member states.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, it's von der Leyen who holds the grip over the whole thing, right? Like,
hopefully.
Yeah, hopefully. And what would be actually your top tip for Šefčovič to make sure the future of the economic security strategy, is bright? As he prepares the hearings, maybe
It's a very good question. And back to the previous part of our conversation, I think their first role, but no, I think as an independent sort of expert, their priority is to give a clear narrative, a clear delineation of what the EU policy they will run in the 5 years is like. For the moment, my complex opening trade at the core plus economic security, environment, and competitiveness to be balanced. This is a very theoretical, intellectual, abstract presentation. I think it's right. If you want to think about what you do, I mean, having a sort of picture like this to guide your strategy is right. You still have to translate this into something which is a punchline. And maybe you could help.
I would be happy to help Maroš Šefčovič in preparing his hearings. And so perhaps also to kind of wrap up this conversation in general, we see that the future of EU trade policy is really, we are talking about weaponization, economic security, and so on. Do you feel like at the end of the day, the future of the EU trade policy is getting a bit US focused in the way of where national security is trumping economic reasoning?
Yes. In that, and with the speed of and the proportion of the EU progressively moving to statecraft. But we are not there. And I think we have to be lucid. We are not there. And quite a lot of people get it wrong when they believe we are there. We now are a big geopolitical elephant and we can discuss with China and armed with the US. No way. For the moment, we don't have the economic power to do that, and we need to regain this. I believe it's perfectly possible, but to the price of a number of efforts. And second, we do not have, at this stage, enough of a common strategic vision about where exactly are our offensive and defensive interests. I'm not saying we are nowhere. We are way better than we were 30 years ago. The reality is that it's not the EU that started thinking about weaponization of trade. We were, and you know this, we were herbivores. And I don't like this notion that we were herbivores and we've always been cheated and we were naive with carnivores. This is sometimes, let's look at the numbers. Look at the EU trade performance on the world market for the last 30 years. It's okay. We've lost less global market share than the US or Japan. Mm-hmm. So this is a question of long term, and the real issue is whether, I hope and probably believe it will happen one day. The question is not whether it will happen or not. The question is whether it will happen fast enough for us not to be crunched in a world that is getting worse and worse every day, and where the notion that we have to protect our people, which was not really, at the beginning, that was not the issue. We were all believing in peace. Well, peace is not the world we live in. We have to adjust. It's complex, but we also have to look at economic realities. We are extremely dependent on open trade.
Thank you so much, Mr. Lamy, for your insights. I hope this will help also Commissioner-designate Maroš Šefčovič in preparing his hearing. If he needs me for any of the slogans or punchline, I'm happy to help. Thanks so much, everyone. So we are now going to ask the attendees to remain seated for the next session. So we are going to do a quick stage change, and I will be moderating the next session on economic security package over the line. Thanks very much.